On the evening of April 22, 2006, in Medicine Hat, Alberta, a family's ordinary life would soon unravel in a way that no one could have predicted. Behind the seemingly normal walls of their suburban home, an unimaginable betrayal was quietly taking shape. It wasn't a stranger that would forever alter the fate of the Richardson family, but someone they loved, someone they trusted, their own daughter. Jasmine Richardson, a 12-year-old girl known for her bright smile and academic achievements, had spent the days leading up to the tragedy in a way that seemed typical for a young girl of her age. But beneath the surface, something darker was brewing. Relationships were shifting. An influence from an unexpected source began to take hold. A relationship that would ultimately lead her down a path no one saw coming. As the sun set that fateful night, a quiet neighborhood was unaware that it would soon be shaken by a tragedy that would leave questions unanswered. Jasmine had become entwined in a world that no one could have imagined. It was a world that involved manipulation, secrecy, and a decision that would tear apart everything she once knew. The events of that night would soon unfold, leaving investigators, the community, and the nation grappling with the chilling realization that sometimes the most dangerous threats come from those closest to us. The story you're about to hear is a painful reminder of the hidden dangers that can exist within even the most trusted relationships. As the case progressed, the questions became more haunting. What drove a young girl to betray her family so completely? What were the signs that went unnoticed? And how could such an unimaginable act have been prevented? Tonight, we delve into the chilling details of the Richardson family tragedy, the truth behind the crime, the investigation that followed, and the lasting impact on a small Canadian town. Stay with us as we reveal the startling truths behind this case, a case that still haunts those who were closest to it. But first, let's take a closer look at the lives of the family members who would forever be altered by the unimaginable choices of one of their own. The Richardson family appeared to be an ordinary, loving household. Marc Richardson, the father, was a hard-working man in his early 40s who had settled in Medicine Hat, Alberta after overcoming a difficult past. He had battled addiction for years, but by the time he met his wife Debra, had put his struggles behind him. Marc's commitment to his family was unwavering, working hard to provide for them and ensure a good future. Debra, his wife, was in her late 40s. A mother dedicated to her children, Debra had also fought a battle with substance abuse in her earlier years. However, like Marc, she had found stability and was deeply involved in raising their two children. She was known for her warmth and affection, always putting her family's needs first. The Richardsons lived in a modest home in Medicine Hat, a small city with a reputation for being peaceful and family-friendly. Marc and Debra had built a life filled with love, despite their past struggles.
Their two children, 12-year-old Jasmine and 8-year-old Tyler, were the center of their world. Jasmine, the elder of the two, was a bright and intelligent girl. She excelled academically and was known for her infectious smile. Her teachers and friends admired her for her kind nature. Tyler, her younger brother, was a playful and energetic child, loved by everyone who met him. He was always the one to bring joy and laughter into the home. Jasmine and her parents shared a close-knit bond. Marc and Debra were proud of their daughter's achievements. Yet as Jasmine entered her teenage years, changes began to emerge. What started as a typical teenage rebellion soon escalated to something deeper. She began to distance herself from her family, withdrawing into her own world, a world that for a time her parents didn't fully understand. Jasmine's behavior shifted as she began exploring the online world. She became involved with people outside of her family's circle, communicating with strangers in ways her parents had no knowledge of. This secret life would be a key factor in the tragic events that were about to unfold. Her once close relationship with her parents started to deteriorate as they grew concerned about the new friends she was making and the changes in her personality. Still, no one could have predicted the depth of the transformation that was occurring behind the scenes. While Jasmine had been a bright, happy child, by the time she turned 12, she was becoming someone unrecognizable to those who had loved her most. Her parents, unaware of the dangerous path Jasmine was on, continued to try to guide her, but their concerns were dismissed by the girl who had already begun to make her own decisions. Decisions that would eventually lead to one of the most shocking tragedies the small town of Medicine Hat would ever experience. The night of April 22, 2006, began like any other in the Richardson household. The family had spent the evening together, and as the night grew darker, their lives would be irrevocably changed. At 3 a.m., in the quiet town of Medicine Hat, an act of betrayal unfolded behind closed doors, one that would leave everyone who knew the family in disbelief. Jeremy Steinke, a 23-year-old man, had become an increasingly significant presence in 12-year-old Jasmine Richardson's life. The relationship had begun innocently enough, as many online friendships do, but it quickly grew into something more dangerous, marked by manipulation and secrecy. Jasmine's parents, Marc and Debra, had become concerned about the relationship, especially after they discovered their daughter's online communications with Jeremy, a man much older than her. Despite their concerns, Jasmine's connection with Steinke deepened. The two had exchanged countless messages, some of which hinted at Jasmine's increasing desire to escape the constraints of her family's rules. Their communication had taken a dark turn, with talk of a future together, away from her parents. But it was more than just words. It was a toxic influence that began to erode the foundation of Jasmine's relationship with her family. As the early hours of April 23rd unfolded, the tension reached its peak. Steinke, dressed in dark clothing, entered the Richardson home through a basement window. His presence was no accident. He had been invited by Jasmine, who had already made her mind. She led him through the house, where her parents, Marc and Debra, slept soundly. Jasmine knew this was her chance to take control of her life, to escape the grip of her family's expectations.
What happened next is difficult to comprehend. Jeremy Steinke, armed with a weapon, launched a violent attack on Marc and Debra in their own home. Jasmine, who had once been a loving daughter, now stood by as the man she had been manipulated by carried out the unthinkable. Her involvement in the crime was not just passive, she was there, complicit in a decision that would forever alter her life and the lives of everyone who knew her. The attack escalated quickly, and the family's once peaceful home became a scene of destruction. As Jasmine and Jeremy worked together to carry out their plan, the magnitude of the betrayal became clearer. The family that had once trusted her was now facing an unimaginable loss, and the town of Medicine Hat would soon be reeling from the truth. The killer was not a stranger, but someone from within their own home. The crime would not go unnoticed for long. In the early hours of that morning, a neighbor would soon discover that the Richardson family's world had been turned upside down, and the investigation would reveal a chilling truth, one that no one could have predicted. The discovery of the Richardson family's tragic fate began with an unexpected visit. On the morning of April 23, 2006, a family friend arrived at the Richardson household. Concerned that they hadn't seen the family for some time, the friend decided to check on them. The house was eerily quiet, and despite the car being in the driveway, no one answered the door. Growing increasingly uneasy, the friend peered through a basement window and saw what seemed to be a lifeless body inside. Alarmed, the friend immediately contacted the authorities. When police arrived at the scene, they found an unlocked door and a house shrouded in unsettling silence. They entered cautiously, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. Upon entering the basement, they discovered the bodies of Marc and Debra Richardson. The scene was chaotic, with signs of a violent altercation. Both parents were found dead, their injuries unmistakable. As investigators moved through the home, they discovered the body of 8-year-old Tyler Richardson in his bedroom, his life also taken.
With no signs of forced entry and the house showing no immediate signs of a break-in, police quickly began to suspect the crime was committed by someone familiar to the family. It was a chilling realization. The killer, or killers, had to be someone the family trusted. As the investigation progressed, detectives turned to Jasmine, the 12-year-old daughter who was missing. Authorities feared she might have been abducted. However, it wasn't long before evidence started to paint a different, more disturbing picture. While searching Jasmine's personal belongings, including her school locker, investigators uncovered a drawing that immediately raised red flags. The drawing depicted a family being attacked, with one member being burned by gasoline. The eerie nature of the image led investigators to question whether Jasmine had knowledge of the crime before it happened. Digging deeper into Jasmine's life, police began reviewing her digital communications. They found that Jasmine had been in constant contact with Jeremy Steinke, a 23-year-old man she had met at a local punk rock show. What started as an online friendship had quickly turned into something darker. Their messages were filled with discussions of running away, rebellion, and troubling expressions of affection. Some messages even suggested that Jasmine had been influenced by Steinke to act against her parents.
Further investigation into their conversations revealed a disturbing side to their relationship. Messages exchanged between Jasmine and Jeremy included plans to leave her family behind, and the growing sense of rebellion was evident. What stood out most was the language used in their exchanges. Talk of a new life together, free from parental control. But as police examined their digital footprint more closely, they discovered an even more chilling connection. In several messages, Jasmine referred to harming her family, and Jeremy expressed agreement. Detectives also uncovered Jasmine's social media profiles, which presented a stark contrast to the child her parents had known. Her accounts, particularly on the now-defunct site Vampire Freaks, were filled with images of dark fashion, gothic imagery, and cryptic messages, showcasing a very different side of Jasmine than the one seen by her family. Steinke, who also frequented similar online spaces, further contributed to her changing persona. Forensics played a key role in connecting the dots. Autopsy results confirmed the violent nature of the crime. Both Marc and Debra had sustained multiple injuries consistent with an attack. Tyler's death, while not as immediately obvious, was linked to similar trauma, though his age had perhaps made him more vulnerable. The combination of digital evidence, the drawing, and the forensic findings pointed to an undeniable conclusion. Jasmine had been deeply involved in the events that unfolded that night. By the time police were able to track down Jasmine and Steinke, the investigation had already gathered enough evidence to secure their involvement. Both were arrested in Saskatchewan, where they had been hiding after fleeing the crime scene. It would soon be revealed that, while Steinke was the one who physically carried out the attacks, Jasmine had played a role in facilitating the events. What exactly happened that night remains a point of contention between the two, but the investigation had uncovered enough to charge both of them with the killings of her parents and younger brother. The case quickly became a national story, capturing the attention of both the local community and the wider public. The details of the investigation, combined with the involvement of a 12-year-old in such a violent crime, left many asking, how could this have happened? What could have been done to prevent it? As authorities continued to piece together the timeline and the events that led to the crime, the public would soon learn that this wasn't just an isolated tragedy. It was a failure of oversight, a failure of the systems meant to protect children like Jasmine, and a failure to recognize the psychological manipulation that had been at play for months. The hunt for Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke intensified in the days following the brutal killings of the Richardson family.
As police pieced together the timeline of the crime, they realized that the perpetrators were not simply hiding within the town of Medicine Hat, but had fled the scene entirely. Evidence led authorities to Saskatchewan, approximately 120 kilometers from Medicine Hat, where they were eventually found. On April 24, 2006, Jasmine and Jeremy were arrested in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, after being on the run for less than 24 hours. The arrest was coordinated through a combination of witness tips and investigative leads, all of which pointed to the young couple. Jeremy Steinke, now 23, had been living with Jasmine for the past few months, largely staying under the radar in the small, tight-knit community of Medicine Hat.
The two were taken into custody without incident. Their arrest was met with shock, as many in the community had known Jasmine as a bright, quiet student and Jeremy as a reclusive man with an odd reputation. They were held in separate cells, awaiting interrogation. The investigation had already uncovered ample evidence of their involvement, but detectives needed the truth. The first interrogation began with Jeremy Steinke. Initially, he denied being involved in the murders, but after hours of questioning, he began to crack. His confession was chilling in its matter-of-fact tone as he described the events of the night. Jeremy acknowledged that he had been the one to physically carry out the attacks on Marc, Debra, and Tyler. He admitted that Jasmine had been present during the murders and had played a role in facilitating the crime. He claimed she had begged him to help her get rid of her parents, claiming they were obstacles to their relationship. The psychological manipulation that had been at play between Jasmine and Jeremy became clear. Jeremy, a man with a deeply troubled history, had preyed on the vulnerability of a young girl who had been seeking emotional escape from her family. He had painted a picture of a future together, far from the constraints of parental supervision, and Jasmine had seemingly fallen into his manipulation. The interrogation of Jasmine, on the other hand, was markedly different. At first, she denied any involvement in the murders. She insisted that she had only agreed to help Jeremy because she had been hypothetically talking about running away from home. Her denial was a sharp contrast to Jeremy's confession. Jasmine's reluctance to take full responsibility, coupled with her deflection of blame onto Jeremy, created a stark divide in the narrative. However, detectives were not swayed by her denials. The overwhelming evidence against her, including the messages between her and Jeremy, the drawing found in her locker, and her digital communications, painted a damning picture. While Jeremy was the one to carry out the physical violence, Jasmine had been the one to orchestrate the events. The digital trail confirmed that Jasmine was an active participant, suggesting she had been planning the crime for weeks, if not months, leading up to the night of the killings. The psychological manipulation at play was undeniable. Jeremy Steinke, while physically carrying out the murders, had played on Jasmine's vulnerabilities, using his influence over her to carry out the attack. Jasmine, still a young girl, had been pulled into this dangerous, toxic world and had taken steps to help facilitate the crime, a tragic testament to the powerful yet sinister influence Jeremy held over her. As the interrogation progressed, Jasmine slowly began to acknowledge her involvement, but her statements were inconsistent, and she continuously tried to minimize her role in the killings, even as the evidence continued to mount against her. By the end of their time in custody, both Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke had been charged with the murders of Marc, Debra, and Tyler Richardson. Their capture marked the beginning of a new chapter in the case, one that would continue to shock the community and raise difficult questions about trust, manipulation, and the chilling consequences of the influence one person can have over another. The trial of Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke drew national attention, becoming one of Canada's most controversial criminal cases. The courtroom was filled with tension as the prosecution laid out the details of the crime, while the defense attempted to explain the complex psychology behind the actions of both defendants.
For the people of Medicine Hat, and for many across the country, this case represented a deep emotional wound, one that raised questions about the boundaries of family, influence, and justice.
Jasmine Richardson, despite being the daughter of the victims, was facing charges of first-degree murder along with Jeremy Steinke, who was accused of being the primary perpetrator. The prosecution's case centered on the overwhelming evidence that both had planned and carried out the murders, though Jasmine's role was a focal point of debate. Her defense team argued that, as a 12-year-old, she was not capable of fully understanding the consequences of her actions, and that her relationship with Steinke had manipulated her into participating. The prosecution, however, contended that Jasmine was not an innocent bystander. They pointed to the messages she exchanged with Jeremy Steinke, the drawing found in her school locker, and her actions leading up to the crime as evidence of her active involvement. They painted a picture of a young girl who had been drawn into a dangerous and toxic relationship, but who still played a significant role in the tragedy. It was a case where age could not be used as an excuse for the magnitude of the crime committed. Jeremy Steinke's defense focused heavily on his past. They argued that his troubled upbringing, marked by years of abuse and neglect, had shaped his view of the world and contributed to his violent actions. His attorneys claimed that Steinke had been manipulated by his past traumas, and while this did not excuse his actions, they suggested it provided context for his behavior. They also emphasized his mental health struggles, which had reportedly influenced his decision-making. The prosecution, however, was unsympathetic to Steinke's past. They pointed to his manipulation of Jasmine, exploiting her vulnerabilities to fulfill his own desires. His ability to control and influence a 12-year-old girl became central to their argument. The court heard that, while Jasmine's involvement was influenced by Steinke, she was not simply a passive participant. Her decision to participate in the murders, even if influenced by her relationship with him, could not be ignored. The trial also touched on the psychological aspect of the crime. Jasmine's age was a factor in her defense, but the legal system had to balance that with the fact that she had been a willing participant in the crime. The question was whether a 12-year-old girl, despite her manipulations and confusion, could have the maturity to fully comprehend the consequences of murder. On December 7, 2007, after a lengthy trial, the verdict was delivered. Jeremy Steinke was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. His defense had not been enough to mitigate the severity of the crime, and the court made it clear that his past struggles could not excuse the actions he took that night. Jasmine Richardson, on the other hand, was given a much lighter sentence. At the age of 14, she was sentenced to 10 years in a youth facility, the maximum sentence allowed for a minor in Canada. Her sentence included time already served, along with psychiatric treatment. The court, while acknowledging her involvement, determined that Jasmine's age and psychological manipulation by Steinke played a significant role in her actions. The sentence sparked public debate. Many questioned whether she deserved a harsher punishment, while others argued that she was a victim of manipulation and should be given a chance at rehabilitation. The impact of the trial on the community of Medicine Hat was profound. For a town that prided itself on its sense of safety, this case shattered that illusion. The Richardson family's murder left an indelible mark, and many in the community struggled to understand how such a horrific crime could have occurred at the hands of someone so close.